For a long time, I just thought, I'm really good at what I do and people will somehow know that and show up and pay me. And that's not the case whatsoever.
So, Michael, welcome to the You Are a Lawyer podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to talk to you because you are a criminal defense attorney. Well, you've sold your firm, but we'll get into all of that. Mm-hmm. You were practicing for 36 years. What kept you so interested that you practiced for so long?
Well, I like to eat and have a place to live. So, it certainly paid my bills for many years and continues to do so. A bit of a rocky journey to get there, but I found that doing criminal defense work was really my passion. I feel like I really helped people out. I always took a very holistic approach to the practice. So it wasn't simply avoiding jail or avoiding fines or whatever the situation was. But over the years, we made a very strong attempt to figure out what the core problem was. My general belief is that most people are good people who just wind up doing something stupid or get themselves in trouble, usually as a result of some trauma or addiction. And so if we can get down to the core of what that really was and deal with that, drinking being one of the big ones, drugs, of course, but other trauma, a divorce, a death in the family, bankruptcy, all of those kinds of things lead people to make poor judgments. And that was why I always felt very good about what I did, or what I, and still do to a certain extent.
So it sounds like what you're saying is a lot of like rehabilitation and kind of forgiveness and second chances types, things like that. Was that a part of your practice, or that was just your mindset in working as a criminal defense attorney?
Well, both. Let's take a typical drunk driving case. A guy gets involved in a drunk driving. Now, to me, there were kind of two categories of those. There was the guy who went out with his buddies on a Friday night and just had one too many. Okay, so he's going to have a low blood alcohol, probably not involved in a crash, and horrified by the event, and it's never going to happen again. But the other category is somebody who really does have a drinking problem, drinking too much on a regular basis, and it's beginning to really affect their lives. What we want to do is get that person into AA or some other kind of treatment, get them into recognizing that alcohol has become a problem. Again, then I can take that to the court and to the judge and say, hey, judge, you don't need to really hammer this guy. We've identified the problem, and now let's, instead of sending him to jail, let's require him to do, 3 or 4 AA meetings a week, or whatever's appropriate for that person. So it's not just that I like doing it. It really benefited the clients, right? Be able to tell their story. And that's the key, is to tell your client's story. Why did they get into this mess? And can you ask enough questions to find out what the real problem is? Not what they told you the very first time, but to dig down enough to really find out what the problem was.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm over here shaking my head. I'm like, yep, because people lie. Or they'll tell you what they think sounds good, and that might not be the truth, or it might not be the underlying factor.
Right. And you have to build up trust to get someone to tell you what really is going on. And they have to believe that you're there to help them. And some people, truly don't understand their own problem. And, sometimes it's a matter of identifying it. I mean, I could tell you stories of we found people with very significant trauma, childhood trauma that were years and years prior to the event, that just had never been addressed. Mm-hmm. And nobody had ever bothered to ask them, to dig down and really go, why are you drinking so much? What is really going on? Because on the surface, everything looks good. But then when you get down to it, you find out that they were victim of a sexual assault or, some trauma as a child that just never got addressed.
And so immediately after law school, you worked in the public defender's office, did that for a number of years before working with a criminal defense firm. What was that transition like?
Well, it's interesting because as the public defender, you have way more work to do, and money is really not an issue. You've agreed with the county to work for X amount of dollars. And so money is not an issue. When you go into a private practice, now you have to run a business and you have to be profitable. And, the worst thing for anyone is to have a lawyer who's worried about paying the rent. So you have to figure out a way to make your firm profitable, run that whole business side of it. And so it's a big transition. And unfortunately, law school in particular does nothing to prepare you for it. And there are very few actual resources out there. Now, there's more every day. I'm seeing more and more people who, sort of in my generation who are wanting to tutor or help the next generation of lawyers become better at what they do. You simply cannot be the best lawyer you can be if you're worried about the money. And so figuring out the business side of it, or whether you should even start your own business, the truth is not everybody is cut out for being a firm owner. It's, take the amount of billable hours that you have to do for the work and then multiply it by 50%. And now that's your week. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And so you actually were at a top tier defense firm as well. So I'm sure the pressure of that stacked on top. Mm-hmm. So after doing that for a number of years, you realize I know enough. I'm ready to do this myself, hang up my own shingle. What was that transition like? Mm-hmm. Even to say, okay, this is tough, all the billable hours, multiply it, but I still want to do it for myself.
I would never discourage someone from considering it, but you have to go in with a plan. And first of all, you've got to know why you're doing this. Why is it that you want to work for yourself and take on all of those issues and the risk? Because firms fail. And when they fail, that means that's money out of your pocket. And I know of many, I should say many, I am aware of firms that literally lose money every month. And at the end of the month, they're basically paying to practice law. That's, in my opinion, because they're not running it properly. The second important part of that transition, and it took me a while because for a long time, I just thought, I'm really good at what I do and people will somehow know that and show up and pay me. And that's not the case whatsoever. For me, where things became profitable was when we started to collect our data. When we could say, this is how many hours it takes to do the average case. This is the average case value. This is what the acquisition cost is. This is how many leads are coming in. This is how many of them set for appointments, show up, hire. I mean, if you know that data, then it becomes a math problem. You just figure out how much you want to make, and then you work backwards to figure out the amount of work you have to do. But if you don't track that, and I work with a number of firms right now, part of my consulting business, and they don't track any of that data. I'm always shocked. I shouldn't be, but I am. It's like, how are you making that decision? How do you know if you can spend that money if you don't even know how much money you made? So I'm sitting here while I was waiting for you. I'm looking at my bank accounts. I look at my bank accounts every single day. I know to the penny where I stand. So I know what I can afford to do and what I need to save for and such. And the firms that aren't doing that, the small owners that don't do that, I really don't understand how they can make a decision. It's a gut decision and it may or may not be right.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely look at my accounts every day too. When I first started the practice, of course, it was hard because you're like, I don't want to see it. But then it's like, no, you have to see it. It has to be in your face. But also to your point, I actually created like a creator billable report where I log outlined for a podcast, recorded a podcast. So I know how much time it takes me to do things so I can know what I charge for stuff too. So
exactly. A lot of people I work with go, oh, well, I do flat rate, so I don't need to track my time. And I'm like, well, because you do flat rate, you would need to track your time even more. Because how could you possibly know if you're charging the right amount? If you're charging $1,000 and it's taking you 100 hours, obviously that makes no sense whatsoever. And lawyers are notoriously bad estimating at how long things take.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of industries are that way. I have a friend out here who's kind of a handyman kind of guy, and he charges people, you know, I'll put on a door, I'll do whatever. And he's always way off of how long it will take because he forgets about the fact that he's got to make the trip to Lowe's to get the stuff. And then, you know, he's got the wrong screws or he needs to go get a tool. And, you know, and all of those various trips just eat into his time and profitability.
Yeah,
and lawyers, it's the same thing. Nothing, very few things run smoothly, right? You know, there's always the fly in the ointment, the glitch that just takes more time than you expect.
Definitely true. And so as we're talking, I'm looking at your book in the background, Legal Ease, which is actually a resource that you've written, one of 4 books, I believe, that you've published, where you
actually 5.
Okay, so that's the 5th, where you're actually teaching young lawyers how to avoid mistakes, teaching people as well how to navigate the legal system and all those things. When did you decide to become an author and why did you do that?
So the first 4 books that I wrote a book about DUIs and, you know, that whole process. I wrote a book, kind of a general criminal about the process. I wrote a book about sex offenses, which is what our firm focuses on, and you know, things that people need to know when they're going through the process and to educate themselves. And then I wrote one on domestic violence, and all of those books were really educational. We'd give those to clients. So you can buy them on Amazon, but we'd give those to clients to educate them on what they can expect to have happen. And writing a book is time consuming. It was very enjoyable, but it also saved me a lot of time because I could give a client a book and say, hey, if you have some questions about, you know, going to court, we'll read chapter 3. Basically went through, you know, what are the 25 most common questions I get? And then that's the book. But Legalese was written because I saw and continue to see lawyers just disintegrate. You know, they work too hard. They don't take care of themselves. They're way too stressed. And they're not getting to the core of what is their issue of what's going on. They haven't set their goals clearly. They're so busy being busy that they're not actually being productive. And, you know, so I talk in the book in several places about the importance of sleep. You know, that's one of the things most lawyers act like sleep is completely unimportant. I will tell you that, to me, that is the secret weapon. If you're not getting enough sleep, you are not performing at your best. And I'm not talking about like one night doing an all-nighter, you know. I'm talking about on a consistent, regular basis, valuing their time, doing work that they shouldn't be doing. I mean, the rule in my firm is that if it doesn't require a bar card, I don't do it. So, you know, because I can only bill for the legal services. I can't bill for running down to Staples and getting paper clips, right? I pay somebody to do that, and it makes sense. But I see so many people doing all of the administrative tasks that are necessary, but don't directly bring in income. So, you know, understanding that was really the focus of the book. And then taking care of yourself, diet, exercise, meditation, all of those kinds of things are you know, I promote because they matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will definitely link the book in the show notes. We'll also have it shown. I'll show an image of it on the YouTube channel. So if you're listening to this with the You Are a Lawyer podcast, thank you so much. I do want to let you know that there is a video that corresponds to this podcast episode. Go to YouTube. You can search You Are a Lawyer podcast or search Kyla Denanyoh to find that. Okay. So Michael, you said in your questionnaire, you went to law school because you didn't want to get a job.
Yes.
And you have since graduated, on multiple businesses. What was it like when you got to law school and you were like, oh, this was not what I was expecting?
So we're talking, you know, I graduated from college in 1982 and things were different then. College, I mean, I went to a Cal State. It was a good school, cost me $187 a quarter. So, I worked in the library and paid for everything, plus skied all around the country. I bring that up because we're not dealing with the kind of tuition that people are dealing with nowadays. I went to law school. It was about, I don't know, $75,000 or $8,000 a year, which I thought was crazy expensive. But relative to today, it was nothing. And I bought my first house and I refinanced it and I paid off that loan. So that was a big part of it. I like school. I take tests well. I've always been a good student. So I was interested in it. It wasn't so much that I wanted to practice law. I really didn't know what that was going to entail. I went to law school. I enjoyed the people I met. I got a law clerk position with a personal injury firm. I really enjoyed that. But I also understood that I needed trial experience to be the lawyer I wanted to be. And that's why I wound up in the public defender's office. And then, as I said, it just clicked. It was clearly my calling, and I had great mentors. That was the other thing. I had people who, dragged me along, let me see what was, going on, gave me the space to make the mistakes that I was going to make. I lost my first 5 trials. I think that was probably the best. It wasn't great for my clients, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to really look at, what am I doing here? And, subsequent to that, I've never lost 5 trials in a row again. I've won 5 in a row, but, it forced me to really take account of what I was doing. I think that's the single most important thing that new lawyers need to understand, is that you got to play the long game. This is not, this career takes years to be really good at. Some people are, have a natural knack at things, but there are so many moving parts that it takes years. I'm still learning. And, I'm 37 years into it and I'm still learning.
Do you remember what it was that made you decide to even look towards trials and go into court, right? Because you could have been a transactional attorney where you were just in a big firm doing paperwork and mergers and things like that, or you could have done litigation and trial experience. Do you remember what made you say, okay, let me look into going to court and doing litigation?
Well, a couple things. Again, if we turn the clock back, I had hair down the middle of my back. I was not cut out to be in a big firm. I had no interest in carrying somebody else's briefcase. In all honesty, I didn't care much about money. So the idea of working, 2,500 hours a year for somebody else to get rich, I had no interest in that. I wanted to do what I thought was the right things to do. And the public defender gave me that freedom. Of course, as a criminal defense lawyer, you always have to answer to your client, but I didn't have, a partner that I had to, answer to and follow their lead. So that was part of what was really interesting for me. I got to develop, and then, taking advantage of great mentors, of sitting and drinking with them and listening to their war stories and going to court and watching them do what they wanted to do. And of course, for me anyway, trial is kind of the pinnacle of, being a lawyer, standing in front of a jury. I'll tell you, there's nothing more humbling than doing a death penalty case where you are literally begging that the jury not kill your client. That is about, there's no more high stakes than that. And, that's what I wanted to do. And I got an opportunity to do it. I don't know that I would do it again. It would have to be the absolute right case, because it takes years off your life. It's one of the hardest things ever. But that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the courtroom, going to battle. And that was the best way. And I wanted to do it over something that I thought was important, as opposed to, this guy needs money, or, suing that person. From my perspective, that just wasn't as motivating.
Yeah, that's completely valid. So currently you do a number of things. You have the 20 Minutes with Mike, you have your website, social media, vlogs, those kind of things. were those created because it's another outlet for you to share all of your experience, or do you use it kind of as marketing tools, or?
A little bit of both. For almost 5 years, I had a radio show, and I talk about legal issues and things coming on and interview various people. During the pandemic, I couldn't go to the station anymore, so we started doing it from home. Would patch into the radio station, and it was costing me money, and so we started doing it on Facebook Live, and I was like, well, I can do this by myself. And then I also realized that an hour show, nobody's going to listen to an hour show, right? So, especially on Facebook or something. So I cut it down to 20 minutes. And then I do use it for marketing and to share, so when I have clients and they have a particular issue, I'll send them a link to one of my 20 minutes with Mike. I talked about this. Why don't you listen to this and see what you think? So yeah, part of it's the branding. I mean, this is the thing I would say for your audience is that, I already said you got to play the long game, and branding is the long game. You just have to be consistently out there, know who you are, and let people know that you know who you are. So when they contact you, you're genuine. You're not trying to be fake. You're not trying to be someone else. You're who you are. And like when you do the show, people see you, right? And you can't fake it for very long. So just be who you are. People know if they watch any of my posts, I really care about what's happening to folks and the importance of them taking care of themselves. And I'm a big advocate of, getting rid of your phone and, having quiet time and taking time to think. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but we're so busy, as I already said, we're so busy being busy, right? That we are missing so many great opportunities because we just don't see them because we got our face in a screen somewhere.
No, I completely agree. I'm reading a book right now called Atomic Habits, where they talk about, Are you in motion or are you making action? And I'm like, a lot of stuff I do is just motion. So that's exactly what you're talking about. So Mike, I have two questions for you. This question is about barking frogs. It's a business that you own with your wife. Are you still doing that?
So yes, we've been doing it. We continue to do that. I'm hoping to put a little bit more love into it so that, gradually I need to replace the income, my lawyer income. So that's part of the plan for that. It's race swag. So, events, if you had a running race or, some other event and you wanted branded hats and, other materials, we do sleeves and what we call a barkie. It's a tube of microfiber. But yeah, we've been doing that for years. It's fun. My wife does 90% of the work. She's a great artist. And so, yeah.
All right. Very cool. I always like to talk about, little unique things that people are doing on the side. And then lastly here, Mike, do you have any advice for a new lawyer about, they're within 5 years of practice, they may be burnt out or they're just over it? Any advice for them?
Your question is if they're burnt out. Well, so why are they burnt out? Not everybody who went to law school should be a lawyer, and not, this is not a career for everybody, just like anything else. If you truly don't feel that this is the right career for you, then you need to ask yourself why. What is it about it that you don't like? Because you might be able to avoid that or change that piece. It was a lot easier back in the day to walk away from a practice because I didn't have the financial investment into it. Nowadays, people come out with student loans that look like mortgages, so more of a challenge, which I would say is why you really need to think about why is it that you're becoming a lawyer before you make that investment. But if you're burnt out, you need to ask yourself why. My first recommendation is you need to read my book. This is really what I deal with, is how, over 37 years, I never got burnt out. I got tired and I worked my butt off, but I never got burnt out. I never even contemplated leaving the practice because I knew how to fix the problems. And, figuring that out, learning how to take care of yourself, learning what your priorities are, really taking the time. And that may require you to go somewhere where your phone's turned off, you have no internet, and you just spend time with yourselves, and really think about what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and what's the problem? What is it that you hate that's causing you to be burnt out? And maybe you need to make that adjustment. The other thing is recognize that you are not going to be a superstar in 5 years. It's just not going to happen. This takes a long time to learn the skills to be a great lawyer. It just, I'm sorry that that's I'm not sorry. I'm glad that that's the truth. But because most people aren't willing to make the investment. The single most important thing people should do is read. And they should read every single day. And it doesn't matter what you read, but you need to understand that how you see the world is not how everybody else sees the world. Clearly, half of our country sees the world very differently than I do. Doesn't matter which side of the fence you are, half of the country sees it differently. Well, if you read and you understand how other people react to situations and view situations, you were much better prepared to figure out how to craft your message. If you're trying to get a judge to do something for you, what is the message that will actually work with that judge? Not is, what would work for you? What would convince me won't necessarily convince that person. So you need to do the research on the judge. You need to know something about them, and you need to learn to craft your message. And so by reading just all the time, fiction, nonfiction, you begin to learn how other people think, and it allows you to craft your message in a way that actually will work. The biggest mistake I think lawyers make is they think that they can change people's core values. You're not going to do that. I've never been able to do that. So what I need to do is I need to work with their core values. What is their core value, and how do I tap into it to get them to do what I want? And that they think it's a win. They think that they're sticking to their guns, and yet they're still doing what I want them to do. And that is the skill that takes a long time to figure out.
Yeah, I love that. The skill takes a long time to figure out. And then the reading also will help because you're getting all these different perspectives. So exactly. To that point, make sure you get Michael's book, Legal Ease. It's there in the background. I'll make sure I link it in the bottom. And also, I do weekly book reviews every Monday on YouTube. So I read nonfiction, fiction, biographies, memoirs, everything. So read. It sounds like that's really important for the practice. So
absolutely. And there's great joy in reading too. Even if it's just 15 minutes a day before you go to bed, not everything needs to be monumental. My meditation, I start with just 10 minutes. And we'll see how, after 10 minutes, if I decide I want to go more, I will. But my commitment's 10 minutes. My reading commitment is 15 minutes. But I stick to it. I do it every single day, no matter what. Yeah. And that's how you get progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. Well, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate this.
Well, I've enjoyed it very much. Okay, great.
All right. Well, you have a great day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye now.